Here's the question I need you to sit with before we go any further today. XRP transactions are settling cross-border in 3 to 5 seconds. The XRP ledger is moving hundreds of millions of dollars in volume. Ripple just published a white paper directly addressed to banks, hedge funds, and major institutions. A literal step-by-step blueprint for how they plug into the system. An XRP ETF is live and processing tens of millions in daily volume. And the CEO of Ripple reportedly received a personal apology from the man who spent years trying to destroy the company. So why is the price still sitting here? That is the question. And if you've been holding through this and asking yourself that exact question, you are not confused. You are paying attention. And today I'm going to show you exactly what the chart is not telling you. The signal is clear, but only for those who are actually looking. Welcome back to Common Sense Crypto. I'm Rich. This channel is built on one principle: calm, rational analysis. No hype cycles, no price predictions with dates, no moonboy theatrics. Just the structure underneath the surface, because that is where the actual story lives. Today we are breaking down what Ripple's new institutional white paper really means, what is happening with XRP volume and suppression, and what the Turkey expansion tells us about the global infrastructure race that is happening right now, whether XRP's price reflects it or not. Let's get into it. Let's start with the hard truth. Most people watching XRP right now are doing one of two things. They're either obsessively checking the price every hour trying to time a breakout, or they've given up waiting and sold. Both of those people are looking at the wrong thing. Here's the concept you need to understand today. The price is the last thing to move. The infrastructure is the first. When a new financial rail system is being built, and that is exactly what is happening, the construction happens in boardrooms, in white paper submissions, in regulatory filings, and in NDA-protected partnership agreements. None of that shows up on a price chart. Not until it's too late to position at the bottom. This week, Ripple published something that most people in this community skimmed over or missed entirely. A white paper titled, "The Blueprint for Institutional Digital Asset Trading." I want you to really hear what that document represents, because it is not a marketing brochure. It is an operations manual. What Ripple is describing in that white paper is a digital prime broker model. Here is the problem it solves. Right now, if you are a large institution, a hedge fund, a bank, a sovereign wealth manager, and you want to trade crypto at scale, you have to open accounts on multiple exchanges, move capital back and forth between them, manage separate credit lines at each one, and absorb significant counterparty risk at every step. The FTX collapse is the case study for what happens when that system breaks. Billions frozen, institutions burned. Ripple's proposal eliminates that architecture entirely. Under the digital prime broker model, one central prime broker aggregates liquidity, manages credit, and nets positions at end of day. Single point of entry, reduced capital requirements, minimal counterparty exposure. And underneath it all, underpinning the settlement layer, is the XRP ledger. Let me be clear about what that means. Ripple is not asking banks to speculate on XRP. Ripple is handing banks a turnkey institutional trading framework that happens to run on XRP rails. They made it plug and play. And here is why that is so strategically significant. Whenever something is easy to plug into, adoption accelerates. When it's complicated, it stalls. Ripple just removed every friction point that was slowing institutional entry. And who do you think that white paper was written for? It wasn't written for retail. It was written for the institutions that are already in the room. The ones already running pilots. The ones already under NDAs. The ones that the public won't know about until the regulations land and the curtain finally comes up. Now let's do the math, because the math here is what cuts through all the emotion in both directions. We know there are approximately 55 to 57 billion XRP currently in circulation. Fixed supply of 100 billion. That cap does not change. Ripple's escrow is releasing roughly 1 billion per month, but the net circulation increase is a fraction of that because the majority gets relocked. Exchange reserve data shows XRP holdings on centralized exchanges continuing to drain. Coins are leaving exchanges. That is by definition accumulation. Now let's look at the volume signal. The XRP ETF, live and operating, is processing approximately $12 million in daily volume, even during a period of market instability and low confidence. That is not peak volume, that is floor volume. Think about what that number does when confirmation of a breakout arrives and institutional allocation begins in earnest. ETF inflows tend to accelerate non-linearly once sentiment shifts. The infrastructure is already live. The inflows are already happening. The question is only magnitude. Now look at Turkey. Ripple's managing director for the region just declared Turkey a global frontrunner in digital asset adoption. And the data backs that up completely. As of 2026, approximately 25.6% of Turkey's population owns cryptocurrency. Among adults aged 18 to 60, that figure reaches 52%. And Turkey processed nearly $200 billion in crypto transactions in 2025 alone, a volume that dwarfs every other country in the MENA region. Why does this matter mathematically? Because Turkey is one corridor, one country, and it already represents $200 billion in annual crypto transaction volume that Ripple is now actively pursuing to run through XRP rails. There are 195 countries on this planet. Ripple has existing or developing rail relationships in dozens of them: Japan, the EU, the UK, Southeast Asia through SBI, and now Turkey accelerating into the center of the picture. Here's the math that retail investors consistently ignore. Cross-border payments globally represent approximately $150 trillion in annual flow. The Nostro Vostro pre-funded account system that banks use to facilitate those payments has roughly $27 trillion in idle capital locked in foreign currency accounts at any given time. That capital earns nothing. It just sits there as a liquidity buffer. XRP's stated design purpose, on-demand liquidity, is to replace that buffer, to free that $27 trillion and let it move at the speed of a ledger transaction. Now ask yourself, what price does XRP need to be for that system to function efficiently at scale? Higher price means fewer tokens needed per transaction, less market impact per transfer, more viable for high-value institutional flows. The price is not just a speculation outcome, it is a functional requirement of the system. This isn't a prediction, it is a design specification. And then there's Axelar. Since the start of 2026, more than $18.6 million in XRP has moved through Axelar's interchain token service across over 5,326 transactions. That is XRP moving between blockchains. That is XRP expanding its utility surface beyond its native ledger and into the broader multi-chain settlement ecosystem. Volume is picking up. Network usage is expanding. The price has not yet reflected it. But on-chain data and price action have always had a lag relationship. The ledger moves first. The market follows. Now let's talk about what the smart money is doing, because actions tell you far more than statements ever will. Start with what happened at the White House. Brad Garlinghouse, CEO of Ripple, publicly described a conversation where a man approached him, said sorry, acknowledged he was wrong, and told Brad that Ripple had done an incredible job. Brad never named the individual. But ask yourself this: who would be at the White House at the same time as Brad Garlinghouse, who would have a specific reason to apologize to Brad, and whose being wrong about Ripple would be significant enough to warrant that telling of the story publicly? I am not going to tell you with certainty who that was. Neither will I speculate beyond what Brad himself described. What I will tell you is this: the fact that this conversation happened, whoever it was, signals that the posture of the US regulatory apparatus toward Ripple and XRP has fundamentally changed. The adversarial era is over. The chapter being written now is one of integration and compliance, and the institutions are reading that chapter in real time. Look at what Nasdaq said this week. An analyst on the platform directly told viewers, and this is the mainstream financial media, not a crypto channel, that everything in the emerging digital asset space has to settle on a blockchain. Stablecoins, wrapped treasuries, real-world assets, all of it needs a settlement layer. And the blockchains that win that settlement race will be among the biggest financial infrastructure winners of the decade. They said, and I want you to really hear this, that Bitcoin moves from address to address. That is it. That is its primary function. But the future of finance, the tokenization, the RWA collateral, the cross-border clearing, all of it needs execution, clearing, and settlement infrastructure. Utility infrastructure. Nasdaq is now publicly questioning Bitcoin's relevance to the future of finance. That is not a crypto blogger saying that. That is the world's second largest stock exchange platform saying that. The narrative is shifting. We are moving from speculation to utility. And in that world, XRP is not one of many options. XRP is one of the only assets with the legal clarity, the settlement speed, the institutional rail infrastructure, and the bank-grade compliance architecture to serve that role at scale. And then there is the bank list. MEXC, one of the world's major crypto exchanges, this week published a detailed breakdown of the financial institutions already utilizing RippleNet and XRP-based settlement. The list is not small. And here's what I want you to understand about that list. It represents only the institutions whose involvement has been made public. The actual number is larger, significantly larger. Because behind every NDA that Ripple has signed over the past decade, there is a bank, a payment processor, or a financial institution that is running pilots, building integration, or deploying XRP in live corridors, and is contractually prohibited from announcing it until regulatory clarity makes disclosure safe. When those NDAs expire, and with the Digital Asset Clarity Act in drafting stages, that expiration is approaching, the list of institutions publicly aligned with XRP is going to shock people. Not the people watching this channel, but the people who told you XRP was going to zero. Let me be specific about what the next 90 days look like, because I believe in giving you a concrete framework, not just a thesis. The stablecoin bill is delayed, but legislative language is circulating. The Digital Asset Clarity Act is being drafted. These are not distant events. They are active processes. When regulatory clarity lands, it does not create a gradual drift upward. It removes the legal barrier that has been keeping institutional capital on the sideline. Capital that has been waiting does not trickle in, it floods in. The XRP ETF volume, currently around $12 million daily at floor levels, will accelerate when that confirmation comes. ETF vehicles are designed for institutional allocation. The pipe is already built. The inflows are already starting. What changes is the size of what flows through that pipe once the institutions get the green light from their compliance and legal teams. Turkey's corridor expansion is on an active timeline. Ripple's managing director is on the ground. The $200 billion in annual transaction volume that already exists in that market represents an immediate target for XRP-based ODL deployment. That is not a future scenario. That is an active business development operation happening right now. And the Digital Prime Broker white paper. Institutions do not read white papers and file them away. They evaluate them for implementation. The organizations that have already been in private dialogue with Ripple about institutional trading infrastructure now have a formal published framework to bring to their boards. Implementation timelines for institutional financial products typically run 6 to 18 months from framework to deployment. The clock started this week. The window for accumulation at current prices is closing, not because of a date on a calendar, but because every one of these developments is a brick in the wall being built around this asset. And when the wall is complete, you will not be buying at the base. You will be buying at the top. Let me address the supply picture one more time, because this is where the math becomes personal. Exchange reserves for XRP are draining. Coins are leaving centralized exchanges and moving into cold storage and long-term holding wallets. That is the on-chain signature of accumulation. It happens quietly. It happens without announcements. And then one day, a large buyer arrives at the market, institutional, sovereign, treasury level, and the available float on exchanges is not what it was. Price discovery happens violently and fast, not gradually. Brad Garlinghouse described this mechanism perfectly when he talked about 1,000 switches. Each switch that flips, each corridor that goes live, each bank that deploys, each regulatory gate that opens, drains a little more of the available supply while adding a little more demand pressure. None of it looks dramatic in isolation, but the cumulative effect is a system that is coiling, not drifting. I want to say something about holding XRP that I think is important right now. You do not owe anyone in your life an explanation for why you are holding this asset. You do not need to convince your coworker. You do not need to defend yourself at dinner. In fact, and I mean this practically, not just philosophically, as XRP's price rises into territory that most people currently consider impossible, Your holdings become a security consideration, not just a financial one. Be quiet about what you hold. Be very quiet. The people who are going to wish they had bought at these prices will be the loudest voices when the breakout arrives. You do not need to be a target. Buy what you can afford, accumulate consistently, secure your holdings, and wait. I want to say something directly to the people who have been in this for the long haul. You bought before the ETF, you held through the SEC case, you held through 5 red months. You watched people around you sell at losses and tell you that you were delusional. You watched the price sit completely flat while the infrastructure underneath it was being built at a pace the world had never seen before. That patience is not weakness. That is the most powerful edge a retail investor can have in a market designed to shake out everyone who lacks conviction. The institutions do not panic. The sovereign funds do not panic. The banks building integration pipelines do not panic, and neither should you. Your instinct that something bigger is happening beneath the surface? It's not an instinct, it's correct. And the data confirms it every single week. Let me bring all of this together because I want you to walk away with a clear picture. This week gave us 3 things that deserve far more attention than they are getting. First, Ripple published a blueprint for institutional digital asset trading that hands every bank and hedge fund on Earth a turnkey roadmap for integrating XRP-based settlement. The friction is gone, the manual is written, the door is wide open. Second, Ripple declared Turkey the next major frontier for XRP rail expansion, in a market that processed $200 billion in crypto transactions last year and where more than half the adult population already holds crypto. Third, a senior figure in U.S. financial regulation reportedly acknowledged personally to Brad Garlinghouse that they were wrong about Ripple. That is not a small thing. That is the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. None of this shows up on a one-day price chart. None of it moves the candle today. But all of it is building the pressure that will move the candle tomorrow. And when it does, it will not be gradual. It never is. Here is what Nasdaq told its audience this week and what I want you to carry with you. The blockchains that win the settlement race will be among the biggest winners of this decade. XRP is not a speculation play. It is a settlement infrastructure play. That distinction is everything. And the world, slowly, then all at once, is beginning to understand it. The math doesn't lie. The infrastructure doesn't lie. And the on-chain data doesn't lie. Stay patient, stay rational, and stay positioned, because the people who abandon their position in the quiet room will be the ones buying loudly in the crowded one. If you made it to the end of this video, drop blueprint in the comments. I want to know who is watching the structure and not just the surface. This is Common Sense Crypto. I'm Rich. Stay patient, stay calm, and as we always do here, we don't wait for the future, we plan for it. See you in the next one. Have a great night.